Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Podcast. Yes, that's right. We are doing this kind of again, on and off whenever I guess I have something to talk about. But hey, it's a new year in 2024, so maybe we'll find some things to talk about and do podcasts on them. I know I've been kind of lax as of late. Mainly it's because I do work a day job, so it's hard to find more time to do these kind of things. Already committing like 6 hours, 8 hours to gaming streams in a week is already a lot. But I'll try and do more of these. And of course, I do have another series I want to start doing, but that one's gonna take a lot of work to do. So, but I do have a little bit of a project that I want to do as well, but that's its own thing altogether. And when those things start coming around, you guys will know. But anyway, hey hey Gauntlets, welcome to the stream. I hope things are well with you. Today's stream we are gonna do a basic writer's workshop, and it's one of those things. It's a mix of stuff that you kind of see from me in general on this channel, as well as I guess my YouTube feed has just been flooded with people analyzing movies and video games and analyzing stories and stuff like that. And that's kind of, this channel is another outlet of that as well, where I kind of talk about stories. And if you read any of my past podcasts, and you watch any of my gaming series or any of my reading series, I do go into a lot of how to read a story. And today we're going to kind of do a general how stories are supposed to be written, how older stories and stories that are decent even by today's standards, how they're generally written, and then things to think about if you ever want to write your own story. And so that's kind of today's stream. We're not going to be here that long today. Once again, because I'm not an expert writer. It's one thing to be able to analyze a story, really understand what an author is getting at or the point they're trying to make. It's another thing to write your own story. So my tutorial on how to write a story will all be very bare bones stuff. You'll have to find people way better than me before you actually get more sound writing advice on how to write a story anyway. Because I can write an essay, no problem. I can write. Well, the other day I rediscovered my skill because I haven't done this in a while, and I've had no reason to for a long time. But yeah, I can type up a 5,000 word essay in a few hours pretty quickly. That was a skill I needed when I was doing my master's degree, and so I haven't done it in a pretty long while, but I kind of rekindled that skill, and so hopefully I can do this other thing that I kind of want to do with that skill and that knowledge. And so but anyway, it's one thing to be able to write a 5,000 word essay pretty quickly. It's another thing to write a story. So the format for the stream is I'm going to kind of give you a quick kind of introduction to writing and how to write and what a story needs. And then we'll do a couple case studies that I'll basically reference stuff throughout my past videos and past streams. And we'll do case studies on how writers were able to pull this off. So let me just turn this off. All right. So I just have, real high quality stream, guys. No background music, crappy dying microphone. I think my microphone is dying, actually. I can't hear it, but I'm sure you guys hear it. And I started hearing this when I was doing a watch back on Can I Draw? Not really. No. But anyway, I noticed this in a watch back of some of like my Christmas videos, that my microphone has this weird buzzing in it. If it's a problem, let me know. I think it's almost time to get a new mic because I've had this thing that I've been using for like years now. Whenever I started this channel, right? But anyway, well, that's an automatic fail right there. Didn't do the font thing right. We'll start with that. Alright, so how to write. I mean, if you want, I can find some music for you. Well, I mean, I don't think it doesn't really matter. I don't want it to be too distracting from, like, our workshop of how to write. I mean, imagine, like, it's one of those things, too, that we've kind of been kind of overly sensitized to. In, like, just the YouTube culture. Is that we're just so used to sounds all the time. And people may find it kind of jarring that, like, oh, there's no, like, background music when I'm watching, like, a video of someone play some game or something, or someone's talking about a controversial subject, but we still have background music. You know, imagine, like, you know, back in the day when you were in grade school, and, like, your teacher's trying to teach you, like, algebra, and there's just, like, background music. Like, you know how weird that would be? But one of those things that, like, especially a lot of young people now, it's weird to think that, like, we live in a world now where, like, we're just so we're flooded with just sounds. And it's one of those things that, like, on a side note, it's one of those things that, like, a lot of Christians, I'm pretty sure, struggle with, where it's like, you try to find your prayer time, as you should always do, like, daily meditation kind of thing, and it can be so hard to, like, flush out any kind of sound, because we're just so used to sound. And so when you're supposed to be, like, quote unquote mentally focusing on God, but you just fill your thoughts with other things because we're just so used to it. It's something in, like, in our modern era where we're just overflooded with information, and we're just flooded with information at all times through all our senses. So it could be really hard to, like, just have time to be quiet kind of thing. And I mean, that just makes it, like, studying and stuff like that all the more difficult. But I'm trying to create, like, a classroom atmosphere here. Anyway, so how to write. Alright, so let's get to the main topic here. So when you think about how to write, well, I should probably put a little caveat. How to write, like, stories and narratives. Not just how to write, you know, like, pen to paper, come up with some kind of thought. But whether you're writing an academic essay, or you're writing a story, whatever the story might be, you always gotta consider that it always starts with an idea. Oh, that is way too thick. It always starts with an idea. You come up with an idea. And so you're like, all right, if I'm going to make a story, it's going to be about an idea. But here's the thing, and I encourage you to try out something. I'm going to open up another one of these. I'm going to open up a Word document. I'll kind of show you a neat little exercise. I've referenced this exercise in, like, some of my reading videos, but it's something that, like, I encourage people to try for themselves. Let's just open up some random Word document. A Word document. Yeah. Now that you mention it, I do try to listen to music, but I end up forgetting what I'm looking for and end up listening to the same tracks. In theater, I would listen to music so I wouldn't slack. Since if I was listening to music, I wouldn't distract myself by talking to my friend. And sometimes music gets me right in the right area for a certain tone I'm going for. I mean, it depends from, like, hopefully you guys didn't see that, but anyway, all my D4 DJ scripts when I was doing the Christmas thing. But anyway, okay, so here's a neat little exercise that that I like to, that you should definitely try this yourself. I'm just gonna show you. This table 2x1, and I mean I'm just using a Word document just to show you this, but I mean you should just pick up a pen and paper and just try this. So a little thought exercise. Whoops, no, not that. What the hell? No, I want it right inside the table. Huh? Alright, whatever. Alright, anyway. So I have this table here, right? Just 2 columns. And yeah, this is just something to try out. And let's say you have on the left side, let's just list a bunch of colors. So red, blue, yellow, green, purple, orange, and then like white and black. Oops. And then this is on one side of the dock. And on the other side, what you're going to do is you're going to write down the first thing that comes to mind. So the first thing is red, apple, blue, water. Even though water's technically colorless, but you know what I mean. Yellow, banana. Green. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of green? Grass. Purple. Yeah, this one's gonna be a weird one, but I'll explain this in a second. Orange. An orange. White. I think paper. Black. Cat. So, just do something like do this exercise in your head real quick. And so you don't have to tell me what you got on. You don't have to tell me what you're thinking of every time you think of these colors. But the reason why I did this real quick was because I wanted to lay out this idea that I've mentioned so many times, especially in my Bible reading streams when I talk about the importance of context. When the ancient biblical writers were writing, they were trying to express ideas and describe what God is like. And the reason for this is because you couldn't just say like, you couldn't just do like something like God and then come up with like a clear-cut idea of what you were getting at. And so they added, so the Israelites, they would add certain describer words of how we would associate with God. So like Father, yeah, you can't use the same word. God is godly, right? Like that doesn't mean a damn thing, right? If you just say God is godly, that doesn't actually mean anything. So, you know, a typical thing is like, okay, they talk about like God as a father, the Father, right? They talk about like all powerful. They talk about, you know, and different like we use different things to associate with more abstract ideas. So when I did the colors at the beginning of this exercise, the point I was getting at is when you think of a color, you never think of a color in a vacuum. When you think of a color, you always associate with some kind of context. And so, even though not all, okay, so using my examples here, not all apples are red. But when you think of the color red, you tend to bring up an image of an apple in your head or something. You don't come up with an image of like an elephant. Usually an elephant, you associate that with the color gray. And so colors don't exist in a vacuum. And so blue, yellow, it doesn't matter what color it is, you usually associate it with a very tangible, real thing. And so you can, you know, to take the exercise further, you know, you come up with other words like, you know, the idea of being young. What does it, like, words that you associate with young, old, and things in your own memory with like, what does it mean to be sad? What does it mean to be happy? You know, and these kind of things. And you throw in your words on this side. The first thing that comes to thought, there's several reasons for it. There's like other psychological things, like such as how trauma can affect how you associate ideas. and concepts. So why is this important is probably what you're asking. Why am I doing this exercise with you? Well, the reason is because when it comes to coming up with an idea, when it comes to coming up with an idea for your writing, whatever that might be, an idea doesn't just exist in a vacuum. You can't just have an idea, and then you can't just write about an idea. Usually, you have to manifest this idea. So, when I say manifest, this can come in many ways. But for storytelling, the easiest way and the most reliable way of doing this is that you create a character. You create a character. And the character is supposed to personify this idea. Let's use a different color. That is the crappiest arrow I have ever made, but you get the point. And you personify your idea. And that is the point of a character. So, a prime example of this, when I was using this sheet earlier, and you think of like, okay, God, right? And then you see one of those weird things is that like, as you read through, if you read through the Bible, and then you think of like God as a character in the story. In a way, okay, let me backtrack. So, if you were to ask someone, what is the point of the Bible? And the point of the Bible is to make good people. That could be an answer that you have. And so, if you were to make good people, how do you go about convincing your audience that your book is about making good people? Well, you create a character, and then you have to personify this character. You have to personify your idea with a character. And so, using the Bible as our example, that's kind of how people like treat God in a lot of the stories. And that's kind of, I mean, there's a whole thing about like why the canon of the Bible is the way it is. One of the big reasons on a theological level is because many a theologian will talk about how like, well, the parts that were kept in the Bible were because they make theological points about the character of God. So once again, character is essential to any kind of narrative that you're making. And so, and I'm making this claim whether you believe or not the Bible is true. What I am, whether you think it's true or not is not particularly relevant to the case I'm making here. The case I am making is when you write and you're trying to express an idea, you need to create a kind of relatability to your idea. And the best way of doing that is through character. Now, this part is going to be pretty important, so I'm going to put this in a big black crayon. The primary purpose of your story... Well, what the hell? A crayon sucks. We are not using a crayon. Crayon sucks. Big black pen marker, I guess. In bold. Your primary point of any story is you need to relate to the reader. Sorry for the background water noise. This here, when you write any story, this is your primary objective. And so, if you fail to do this, it doesn't matter how cool your idea is. It doesn't matter how cool your idea is. If you fail to relate to the reader, who gives a shit what your story is about, basically? And so this is why character is super important. Now, from the character, we need to get to the next bit. So after you come up with your character, you need to come up with the next point of the story, which is purpose. So on the overarching level, idea, you have to manifest your idea. That's the point of the character. And then you have to have a purpose to why you're telling people your idea, whatever your idea might be. Your idea has to have a reason for being there, because if it doesn't have a reason, then once again, like, okay, you can give me 1,000 words, but if there's no purpose to it, no one gives a damn, right? And this is true of anything. It's like if you have a conversation with somebody, there has to be a purpose for it. A little bit of life advice. This is why like dating is down the shitter, right? It's because a lot of people, they do all the flirting and courting game, but purposes are never laid out clear. Like, yeah, there's the implied, like, okay, you want to be in a relationship. Well, okay, but your relationship's got to go somewhere, right? And so, the traditional view is that, well, you should date to marry. That the reason why they would tell you that, like traditionalists, is because that is a very clear purpose of why you're dating. It's a very clear purpose. You want to get married. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. It's almost self-explanatory. So purpose is important. So in writing, you need to address purpose. And the safest way of doing that is you have the character ask, I should probably put a caveat with the character thing. You can have a set of characters. When I say character, I don't mean just like every story has to revolve around a main character. You're allowed a set of characters. In my case studies, I'll elaborate this more. But when I say character, I'm going to just add an S and not shoot myself in the foot now. Characters. So character or characters. You personify your idea. Okay, so anyway. Back to green. Whoops. No, I should have just left it like that. Essentially, when you write an idea and then you come up with a character, you have to ask yourself, what do they want? And this part here, I want to talk about this part the most in today's video. Because I think the big problem with many writers today is that they're really, really bad at making this part clear. You have to make this, when you write a story and you set up a bunch of characters, and if you want to have a point to these characters existing, you have to ask, what do these characters want? Now, at first, it sounds like it should be easy, right? I mean, you fall on any like primary genres of storytelling, and the reason why genres exist is because usually those genres ask the same sort of questions consistently through them. That's kind of how you differentiate a genre in a story. Okay, fantasy story, defeat big evil bad, magic being. All right, that is a question that's asked in various fantasy stories like Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter. That question of what do these characters want? The answer doesn't have to be the same, obviously, but your story has to ask this question: what does the character want? And then you have to come up with an answer to that question. It can't be ambiguous, because otherwise you don't have a plot. Romance stories are super easy. Okay, what do the characters want? They want love, right? So that you create an entire genre out of that. That's how genres in stories are kind of delineated. That's the word I'm thinking of. Is because once again, when you ask this question, what do they want? And usually a genre of stories usually fall into like the same set of answers. Now the answer doesn't have to always be the same, but they fall under like a certain set of answers within that, right? So once again, using fantasy as the example, usually is like overcome big monster, or get big treasure, which involves dealing with big monster, or fame and power, which involves dealing with big monster. saving the world, which involves dealing with big monster. So the purpose, you have to ask yourself, what do your characters want? And see, the reason why I word it this way of what do the characters want is because you can't simply just have it be part of like the idea of like, let's make a story about a dude fighting a dragon. Okay, but why the hell would he want to fight the dragon, right? So you have to come back to this question. Well, why would a guy want to go pick a fight with a dragon? And so, you get using the Bible as our example again. I'm already doing case study 1 at this point. Dealing with the dragon. So in the Bible, there's an interesting thing that the Bible does, and I've talked about this in my Genesis reading, in the very first stream. Talk about like why was it a serpent that appeared to deceive Eve and Adam by extension? And so one of the things that I talked about quite a bit in that stream, God, it's weird to think I did that stream like almost 3 years ago. Maybe rehash my entire Genesis discourse, but and make it a lot more clearer. But what I was getting at was the reason why a serpent, and the idea of like many people had theories that like it was a dragon, not just like a regular snake. But like some people had theories of like a crocodile or something, like a more vicious, larger reptilian creature. And then the more mystical side of the Bible suggests that like it's a dragon. And the reason for that is because the dragon represents like an amalgamation of the idea of threat and predator. And so you think of like what a dragon is made of, right? So dragon's got fang and claws, the obvious predator, tools of maiming and ripping up things, right? It's got fang and claw. But obviously the dragon is more powerful than that. The dragon has control over nature, which is why in Eastern mythologies the dragon breathes out water. And then in Western mythologies, dragons breathe fire. It's because they have a control over nature. So the dragon is already a larger than life character because there's some control of nature in his power set. Just like how in real life there are predators that have to use some kind of other tool aside from fangs and claws. Some animals use poisons, for instance. And then after that, well, you look at a dragon. It's reptilian, which means it's mobile in water. It can swim. So the water isn't safe. And then the dragon flies too, which means the sky isn't safe, right? So like basically you encounter a dragon, you're screwed, because dragons represented like this great amount of power and ultimate level of threat. And so in the story, the evil in the Bible, evil is introduced into the world through a dragon. If you wanted to, go the more poetic way of describing it, it's brought into the world by a dragon. And so you jump all the way to the end in the book of Revelation, which I know you guys are asking when I'm going to do the reading of Revelation. I don't know, but in the book of Revelation, once again, the evil one, quote unquote, as we normally dub as the devil, is depicted as a dragon. And of course, there's a parallel with Genesis. And so that's where many people get the whole Genesis is also a dragon. It kind of makes sense if you read the whole way through. Is that it's this ultimate being of threat, if you will. And that's why it's always a dragon in fantasy stories. And so in the beginning, in Genesis, the humans are powerless to the dragon, which is hilariously ironic, because Adam and Eve are like magic beings in paradise. But yet, even with that, they're no match for the dragon. Whereas in the book of Revelation, that's the ultimate triumph. Jesus comes on a white stallion and he kills the dragon. Well, he doesn't technically kill the dragon, he just beats the shit out of him and then throws him to a lake of fire forever, which is probably a fate worse than death, but you get the point. So you had to ask, okay, well, what was the point of beating the dragon? well, the Bible goes out of its way to tell this long story through history, quote unquote, to tell a story about how God God wants a relationship with people, but through as early as the deceptive words of the serpent, human beings will constantly reject God's desire for a relationship. And so throughout the entirety of the Bible, the idea is that God wants a relationship with people, but people keep resisting. And that's ultimately what sin is that humans ultimately resist God's desire for a relationship because humans think they don't need God. Humans think they can do relationships better than God, or whatever the reason might be. The point is that humans keep resisting. That's the point. And so you still have to, even in the grand narrative of the Bible, you have to ask, okay, what does the main character, God, want? And then you have to ask yourself the next question, which is the tough part of your story. New color. Let's go red. So if in the overarching ideas we have idea, the manifestation of the idea, the purpose the idea needs, and then the obstacle. Or let's call it something better. The opposition. The conflict. Yeah, sure, we can call it that too. I'm going to call it the opposition. Because it can come in all kinds of ways, right? I mean, it's true about the word conflict itself, because conflict doesn't have to mean like epic fight scene, right? The example is like romance stories. Romance stories don't have like conflict in that sense. But obviously the conflict is, why isn't the love story playing out simple? And we'll do our case study of a romance story that does this pretty well. So if you have an idea and you need to manifest your idea needs a purpose, but now it needs an opposition. Because if you don't have an opposition, you have no story. And so a way of doing this, how you address this within your in my little chart here, flow chart. That's totally the word I was thinking of, where the idea is manifest into a character or set of characters, and then their purpose is their desires, or what do they want. So I should probably write that in a better word here. It's a desire. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, why is this not easy? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And so these two things go hand in hand. What do your characters want, and why is it not easy? And the reason why these two things are so important, I think many writers forget this primary element of storytelling and writing. Because anytime you need the plot to advance, you have to ask yourself, okay, why do the characters want this? Add MacGuffin into the story. Okay, why do the characters want this? Why do they want this? And then once you have an answer to why do they want it, you have to constantly ask yourself, why is this not easy? Why is this difficult for your characters? Whether you're writing a hero or a villain, your protagonist and antagonist, you always have to ask this question. Now, okay, this is where I would write the word conflict. Conflict is essentially the manifestation, if you will, of why this is not easy, why the desire is not easy to achieve. Now we get to the more interesting bits about how to explore each of these particular things as you write a given story. So, a thing that many people mess up in writing is that many characters want to start their world building with the idea. For example, an easy example why people might think this is the case is because you take like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. Okay, the idea of the boy who lived and fighting fighting evil, being the chosen one, kind of idea. Chosen one wizard boy. Okay, if I have a chosen one wizard boy, then I should probably immediately start world building and create the magical world of Harry Potter. But no, that is not how you're supposed to write. You don't actually begin with world building. Your world building is actually part of this process. What many people, this is the biggest pitfall of most writers. World building is actually one of the later parts in this original creative process. See, the world building serves. Need a new color. Just use black, I guess. World building serves to allow obstacles to exist. And this is an important key word. It has to allow these things to exist. And this is this is one of the biggest problems of writing. Is that many people forget that this is the real purpose of world building. It has to allow the obstacles to exist. Because why would you okay, so let's put it this way. Why would you bother with world building if it's not going to serve in the story somehow? And so if you think in like a linear writing process like this, you can get to idea, character, desire pretty quickly without needing to world build anything. And so the reason for world building has to serve in the opposition side. And then essentially what its function is that it allows obstacles to exist. Okay, why do the obstacles exist? So going back to our case, okay, we're just going to jump into case study number 1, the Bible. And so one of the things that, some smartass goes, well, the Bible's poorly written because it doesn't world build. It's like, well, one easy answer is that it kind of doesn't have to, because it's assuming real people. And that's why when you read Bible stories, the humans act like normal people do. And so I've made this case a number of times, even though I haven't played this particular Fire Emblem on the channel. But if you ever played Fire Emblem Engage, and my big criticism of that game, especially its story, is that people in that story don't act like how people would actually act. And in that way, you could make the easy argument that Fire Emblem Engage has like really shitty world building, because people don't act the way that they do, or how people would act. And so, in contrast, when you read parts of the Bible and you see the way that people behave in the Bible, the world building is that this is how humans. The world building is throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, the big distraction as to why God's primary objective of relationship with humans doesn't seem to be working is because humans naturally reject. And it can be anything, right? Whether God wants a relationship, they reject goodwill out of other people. Human beings naturally reject goodness. That's kind of the Bible's main opposition. And we call that's what, the religious person calls sin. That's ultimately what sin is the rejection of God and his goodness. And so That's kind of throughout the story of the Old Testament. That's what humans are like. This is ultimately Moses' problem in the book of Exodus, and why he has major anger issues, and why he doesn't get, and ultimately why Moses is not allowed into the promised land, as you read through Exodus and then later on the book of Numbers, is that the Israelites are like, they're really, really stubborn, and they really don't want to they don't want to listen to God, basically. And so this pisses Moses off, and that's why Moses has all the anger issues he does. And understandable, right? And so in that context, it's Moses acting as a surrogate for the audience, asking that question: why is this not easy? Why is God's desire for people to be good to each other and for God to have a relationship with people, why is this not easy? Is because the Israelites, who are much more generalized throughout Exodus and throughout the Pentateuch, is that humans are stubborn and they don't want to. They don't want to. That is not human nature to be good. And so the reason why this build up in Exodus is so important is because as you read through people in later parts of the Bible, the book of Judges, which I've done that read through on the channel. You think of like the book of, oh my god, the book of Samuel and the book of Kings. It's just like, when it gets really bad, where like you don't go from just generally people are awful and don't want to, well, not awful, that's a poor way of wording it, that people are naturally rebellious toward God. And then you get to Judges and you get to Samuel and you get to Kings, and this is where people become awful. And not only are they rebellious, but they will do all kinds of things to be like a massive middle finger toward God and be like, no, you don't get to decide how we do things. We humans can do whatever we want. And whenever humans decide they want to do whatever they want, the Bible makes a point of, this is actually a really bad idea. And this is where you get to like all those really messed up stories of like people sacrificing children, like women being treated like beyond awful in the Bible and stuff like that. And this is where like your typical anti-Christian rhetoric is all like, oh, the Bible has these like moments of like slavery and whatever. It's like, yeah, because people are awful. The book of Exodus gave us the world building that when you read later parts of the Old Testament, yeah, of course people are going to be pretty awful if you allow them to do whatever they want. Because then you look in the real world and it's like, yeah, that's how people act. If you let people do whatever they want, they're going to do whatever they want and not care about other people's lives. That's how that works. And so let's fast forward to the New Testament. Well, the New Testament, this is why when Jesus goes around and he's doing like miracles, he's feeding the hungry, he's healing the sick, and you'd expect like, wow, this guy has all these magic powers that can like make life for everyone better. He's like, why don't people actually like listen to what Jesus says if he's like doing all this stuff that's like good for people? But the entire of the Old Testament has established that people don't care about that. They really don't. And then of course Jesus himself recognizes this in a story within a story. Jesus tells the story of the rich man and Lazarus, where a rich dude who's unnamed and a poor dude named Lazarus, they die on the same day. And basically the rich man is like in Hades and he's like suffering. Well, he sees Lazarus in the distance somehow, but remember, metaphorical stories. He sees Lazarus in the distance in God's comfort, in the bosom of Abraham, which is a euphemism for God's comfort. Paradise, basically. In heaven, basically. And so the rich dude's like, yo, like, relieve me of this torment. Like, send me some water or whatever. And then Abraham, he's like, well, sorry, dude. Like, there's this gap between us that I can't cover. We can't go over this gap that exists between us. It's just kind of how it is. And then the rich man goes, well, send someone to my family members so that they don't have to enter this shitty place that I've now been stuck in forever. And then Abraham's response is interesting. He goes, why? They already have the scriptures and they have the words of the prophets. So there already exists something. And then the rich man goes, well, if you send Lazarus from the dead, then they will believe. And then Abraham makes an interesting point. He goes, even if they saw a man come back from the dead, I don't think that's going to change anything. And that's how the parable ends. And the point of that story that Jesus was getting at was that was how the world had become. And people became so cynical toward the idea of God and being good that it doesn't matter. It basically more or less doesn't matter what God does. Although ironically, Jesus, does the whole dying for the sins of man thing and resurrecting from the dead. But without that, and even then, people, there's a whole crazy thing where like I've given academic lectures and even backed up any claim that I've made in this regard of like, okay, history is actually pretty sure that not only did Jesus like live and die, that's like one of the most like undisputed historical facts. So anyone who goes around saying Jesus didn't exist is just beyond batshit crazy, because he's probably the most recognizable like historical figure than any other like ancient figure. Because if you were to deny that Jesus existed, you would have to deny every single like Siddhartha Gautama, Alexander the Great, any of the like King Tut. You'd have to deny all these people existed. If you can't even acknowledge that, like, it's pretty likely Jesus did exist because there's just so much historical evidence to suggest that he did. Of course, the real question is whether Jesus rose from the dead. That's the question that ultimately matters. But I'm sidetracking here. The point of pre-resurrection of Jesus Christ, the reason why the people were so skeptical toward Jesus was because the Bible had already done this huge amount of world building to tell us that human beings will naturally rebel. And so when Jesus shows up and he's like, I am, I've come to give life, I've come to I've come to bring relief to the poor, I've come to heal the sick, people are just like, yeah, okay, bruh, right? Like, people were so skeptical. And then of course the book of John even amplifies this even more into the ridiculous levels, where Jesus even makes like certain claims about basically being equal to God in the famous, before Abraham I am the bread of life statements. I am the resurrection and the life. All those statements Jesus makes. These are statements that no human being would ever make. And therefore the logical conclusion was that Jesus was making claims about being God. And so even in those moments, the people are just like, yeah, whatever. Right? Like, nobody takes Jesus seriously in throughout the Gospels. And the reason for that is because, once again, the world building had been done throughout the Old Testament that human beings were extremely resistant to the idea of God in general. And so the world building, it allows the obstacles to exist. So when you ask the question, okay, if God wants a relationship with humans, why is this so hard? Stop your yapping. Hey Seuss, I'm currently earning no shillings. Well, that was basically you say that as a joke, but that's basically how it was in the Bible, like unironically. That's how people treated it. They're like, oh, well, we got more important things like our jobs to deal with. Like, I know you say it as a joke, but that's actually how it was. Because once again, that's like the world building of the Bible is that like it's based on real people and how real people would act. And so by constructing the Old Testament the way that it was, the obstacle of why humans were so skeptical toward Jesus in the New Testament. That exists to once again answer this question. Well, why is God's desire for relationship so damn hard? It's because human beings are rebellious. That's kind of the point the Bible is making throughout the entirety of the Bible. And so the Christian message is about, well, God is going to recircumvent this problem by making himself, the atonement for sin. That's kind of the way that the Bible explains how to get around this problem. Is that he himself will take the punishment, so that even though some humans may choose to follow, some people will not. God had taken it upon himself for the wrath of God, because one of the things that people think, like, God acts irrational about this, but not really, is that God gets pretty pissed off because people keep doing this and getting in the way of this. So then God's like, you know what, I should just obliterate your ungrateful asses. And then he reconsiders and goes, no, that is not going to fix the problem. And so that's why the whole repentance message of Christianity is that, like, well, the reason why God gives us an out is because he really doesn't want to take the easy way out of this. The easy way out of dealing with the opposition, which is, just to obliterate everything and start all over. Of course, you see the inverse of this story pretty often. That's the whole motif of the evil God story, is that the evil God's like, yeah, actually, I am going to just obliterate everything. And then the heroes, the humanity being the underdog of the story, goes, no, we're going to challenge that. And then they succeed in your, humanity being the good guy story. So that's case study 1 of, like, understanding world building. Now, I'm going to expand on the purpose in a little bit, but I'm going to use my second case study to do this. Because the Bible didn't necessarily need to do this part of the, like, reaction purpose. So let's label that. So there's something called reaction purpose. And reaction purpose is because based on world building, then the desires of characters have to shift. So from here, you get something called that is a terrible arrow. Let's try that again. There you go. The reaction. Of course, most stories have to utilize this, because when you're telling stories about people, as opposed to, like, God, you need more of this, whereas, like, God can kind of just rewrite the rules at any given time, which is why reaction is not necessary. Although, once again, the Bible does have a little bit of that. But it's not, like, a big part of the story. I mean, the whole Jesus becoming human thing is one way of interpreting a reaction. And the purpose of the reaction is to redirect purpose. And I know you are all waiting for this, because you all know I can't go a stream about storytelling without talking about this particular story, because it's one of my favorite stories. Crap, no. Redirect. It's hard when I gotta squeeze it in here. Purpose. That's the point of reaction. And the story I'm going to talk about, and I know nobody is surprised about this, I'm going to talk about the quintessential quintuplets and how this handles this very well. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a back step in world building before I go into talking more about the quintessential quintuplets. Now, something you may notice if you've, like, okay, you take a fantasy story and you have idea, characters, the purpose of, the character's desires, and then the conflict. And then because of that, in a fantasy story, you gotta do... How'd I know? Though I did expect it to be Heroes or Warcraft. Warcraft is definitely coming up in here at some point, and you know it. But we'll get to that later. So, Case study 2, the quintessential quintuplets. So, going back to, I jumped ahead. So in a fantasy story, the world building creates why the general desire is not easy for your heroes and your protagonists. You know, the big dragon, or, you know, let's take Lord of the Rings as like a good example of like building, building the world of Middle Earth. Is because it can't be easy for like the hobbits to just walk into into Mordor and throw the ring into the fire. It's not gonna be easy. So they had to world build this quite a lot in order to make this like what should be a relatively simple task, as everyone has like memed on the internet at this point, that like, oh, destroying the ring should have been pretty easy, but no. J.R.R. Tolkien, he painstakingly did a lot of world building to throw in tons of obstacles, to the point that if you actually like read Lord of the Rings again and actually see that in the end of the day, if you follow Tolkien's philosophy and his theology, at the end of the day, destroying the ring was actually not something a mortal could do, but rather God uses a bunch of mortals. And yes, ultimately God is the hero of Lord of the Rings, abstractually, because human beings ultimately could not resist the power of the ring. And so the world building went like balls deep in Lord of the Rings, because it had to give you like basically a billion reasons why destroying the ring is impossible for humans. But see, in Lord of the Rings, you have to make like Middle Earth like humongous. It's ginormous. But if you actually read any kind of rom-com, like say the quintessential quintuplets, you actually notice that the world is not very big. And the reason why the world isn't very big and there's not a lot of world building is because you don't have to. See, when I say world building, this can come in many ways. Once again, I wrote world building here for its purpose, and the purpose is to allow obstacles to exist. But in any kind of social based story, there's an easy way to create conflict. And all you do is just make more characters. And so, using the quintessential quintuplets as the example, well, okay, the romance story of Usugi Futaro. Why is this not easy? Why is his maturity and finding love in his life not easy? It's because there are 5 girls who all happen to be sisters, quintuplets even, that are all in love with him. That's kind of a conflict that spells itself. And so, the world building in the quintessential quintuplet is very minimal, because all you have to do is just develop 5 more characters, the quintuplets. And then what the story... This is why, actually, even though Futaro is the main character, and the big question that is asked, what is the purpose of the story, is that Futaro finds love in the story. But the world building is done through basically telling a lot of stories about the sisters. The stories of the sisters which is essentially the world building in that story. But because all you have to do is just develop 5 sisters, you don't need to make the world a lot bigger than the 5 sisters. And so, this is where we get to the redirecting purpose. So, what makes the quintessential quintuplets work as a romance comedy as well as it does, compared to other ones, and why I like it compared to a lot of other ones, is because the story actually asks multiple questions throughout the story, because it wanted to do it. The writer, Harubi Neji, or Neji Harubi, I guess is how you should say it, because the last name goes first. So Neji, he wanted to make an interesting love story, but he didn't just want that to be like from the get-go. He didn't want like the story to only have that. He wanted other tensions. He wanted other ways to develop his characters, and so he created other conflicts in the story. So he puts the love story in the back burner at the beginning of his own story, And so he created the character of Usagi Futaro to be the main character. And then his purpose, his motivation, his desire in the story is to make money and to show off that he's smart, and to prove how smart he is. That's basically his driving motivation for a lot of the early parts of the story. And so the why is this not easy is because the sisters are dumbasses. that's basically the opposition, is that the sisters are a bunch of dumbasses, and so they don't make the job easy. Not only are they a bunch of dumbasses, but they also are like they don't trust him, and then that's where you like world build the characters. And there's this weird, like, I know the quintessential quintuplet is not the best example of like world building, because once again it's kind of like cheating by using characters as world building. But I was using this case to explain why you don't have to make the world that big in a rom-com. It's because you just make the female love interest. You put parts in their character, their character traits that make them the problem. So one of the things in the quintessential quintuplets, which is actually really charming, is how each sister portrays different parts of the same problem. Not only are they a bunch of, well, dummies, but they lack something that Futaro does have. And Futaru's taking the phrase "you are my world" literally, yeah, not even wrong. So Futaru's main quality is that Futaru developed an arrogance in that since he always thought he was so smart that he's always right, that no one could possibly challenge the way he thinks and does things. That's it, and that's his main character trait, and that's also his main character flaw, that he thinks he's always right. Well, now you have these 5 girls who basically have to remind you that no, you're not always right, and because of that, you don't get to tell me what to do. And so that's where each sister, in different ways, reminds him that he doesn't know everything. So Ichika acts more mature than he does. She tries to act very mature because it's to reflect a little bit of Futaru's immaturity in that thought process, that he thinks he knows everything. Nino takes the opposite approach. Her approach is, oh, just because you're quote-unquote hired by our dad to be an authority figure, you think that just gives you the right. But that's not how life is. And so Nino reminds him that you can't just be an authority, that you don't get to be the smartest person just because you have authority over someone else. Miku's whole dynamic is that how do I put this? Miku's whole dynamic is that since she already doesn't know what to do about her life, she assumes that no one can just give her the answers to what she wants in life. And so her character arc is that she has to go through self-discovery. And then Futaru also has to go through self-discovery. And Miku helps him with that, which is why most people actually like Miku. It's actually why she's the most popular sister, even though she was designed from the get-go to be like a total loser. Oof. I guess there must be a lot of losers out there too. But Yosuba is the weird one, where Yosuba, her opposition to him in Futaru's mindset of him thinking he knows everything is that you don't have, it's okay to live your life without knowing everything. That's the lesson Yosuba teaches him. And that's actually, it's going to be that meme where like I'm going to be surrounded by machine guns. You ready for it? The reason why, by the way, massive spoilers for the quintessential quintuplets. This is the reason why he actually chose Yosuba. The reason why Futaru chooses Yosuba at the end of the story is because that is the part that mattered the most to him. That he does realize that he doesn't always have to know everything. He doesn't always have to be in charge. It's okay to let that go. And that was ultimately what he himself needed to learn, in order to not be the arrogant prick that he was at the beginning of the story, to a very sensitive and realistic person by the end of the story. The lesson Yoseba teaches him in her opposition to him is that he realizes he doesn't actually have to know everything. He can just be a guy. He can just be normal. he can just be a guy with his own thoughts and opinions, and live his own life, and not be defined by just being smarter than and better than everybody. And then of course we have Itsuki, and she's kind of the outlet for him to kind of. It's similar to the Yoseba thing, but Itsuki doesn't teach it to him very well. Itsuki's whole problem is that she herself can't let go. And so, in a way, that's the reason why the two of them... A lot of people thought it was going to be Futaro and Itsuki because they were so similar in that way. Because Itsuki has the same character flaw that he does. And so, the lesson she essentially teaches him is that you're not alone in this struggle. And you don't have to be. No matter what your problem is in life, don't worry. There's somebody out there who's probably just like you, dealing with the same problem. However, the solution to that is not to just bash at each other's heads and hope one caves. That's not how that works. But rather, you need to work together to overcome that problem together. And that's kind of the lesson Itsuki teaches him. And so, the reason why this is important is because throughout the story, as Futaro deals with each sister, and then the later part of this... Okay, backtrack a bit. So, before he has to... throughout the first half of the Quintessential Quintuplets, it's about Futaro wanting to teach the girls in tutoring so that they can graduate high school. Well, first it's to pass the grade, because they're second-year high schoolers, and the girls are potential flunkers. Because, remember, they're kind of really dumb at the beginning of the story. And so when he learns about the sisters and parts about them, he readjusts how he's going to go about this, his desire, because the world building is that the sisters all have their own problems. And now he has to deal with how to, teach them specifically so that they will pass the grade. But of course, the second half of the story flips this on its head and then goes, oh, wait a minute. This is supposed to be a love story? So the emphasis is that the sisters now have to try and win his affection. And now you have, this is where I like the characters plural thing here. So now we actually flip it. It's not about Futaro and his desires anymore, not as much in the second half. But now we go to the five sisters. What do they want? Well, they all want the same thing. They all want Isugi Futaro as their boyfriend. And so, why is this not easy? Because I have four sisters that all think the same thing. And so, now, what made the second half of the story so interesting in that way is because the world building had already been done when Futaro had to deal with each sister and the things that they teach him. Now we have to take those same philosophies and then pit them against each other. And this is where you get the reaction and the redirecting of purpose of the story in your typical how you write a story. And so using the quintessential quintuplets for a little bit longer, when the story is redirected back into a love story, because it's supposed to be one from the start, but it moved away from that for a pretty long time. The sisters constantly have to watch out for what the other sister is doing. And so it constantly redirects the purpose of why do the characters want what they want? Is it just about Futaro? Or is there something going on between the sisters? Is there a bigger problem between the sisters that needs to be dealt with? Which there is. And that's kind of fleshed out toward the end of the story. Go read it yourself or go watch the anime. Uh, it's a good story. I'm not gonna spoil everything. I already spoiled the biggest plot twist in the story. So, but it's a story you should read for yourself, and it handles this very well. And the reason why the quintessential quintuplets resonated with people so much was because in this process of after world building the sisters as being the conflict and having characters constantly change their approach to their desire based on each other, it nailed this. It nailed this. The story was able to relate to its readers very, very well. Which is why, even to this day, there's a 5-way waifu war about which girl is best girl. By the way, leave in the comments which sister is your favorite quintuplet and why it's Nino. Our third case study is actually another romance story, but it's not flat out a romance story. At least not. I mean, it is a romance story, but like the way that the story paints itself is kind of not romantic for a long time. And that is Teasing Master Takagi. And it's a story essentially about two people. And this is where like the writing skill had to be like top notch when it came to coming up with an idea, your characters, their desires, and why this is not easy. And so, in Teasing Master Takagi, the basic premise of it is there's two students in middle school. And I don't think their first names are actually ever given. No, I think about it. I was gonna go to this whole thing about like full names. I was like, actually, the story never tells you their first names. So Takagi, the female lead, and Nishikata, the male lead. And so basically, you have an idea of two middle schoolers fall in love. Alright, so you have Nishikata and Takagi. Those are your characters. Two middle schoolers fall in love, Nishikata, Takagi. They're supposed to fall in love, alright. What do these characters actually want? So the story begins with Nishikata's desire in the story. His desire is to basically outsmart Takagi. Because what the story quickly establishes is that no matter what he tries, she always outsmarts him. And so, why is this not easy to outsmart Takagi? Well, one, she's smarter than him. And so there's each prank in the story continuously world builds how much smarter Takagi is than Nishikata. And so, when it comes to redirecting purpose, this is where he keeps trying to come up with new plans, but then later in the story, Nishikata kind of stops caring about winning so much. In the way that he was at the beginning of the story. His desire changes. He's no longer about just like trying to get a win on her. Because he kind of concedes that like, okay, this is the world building established that Takagi's a lot smarter than him. So he's not gonna outsmart her. He's kind of conceded to that idea. But then of course there's another character in this story. Takagi. So we have a character, Takagi. What does she want? She wants Nishikata to notice her as a woman. That's her whole objective in the story. And unlike him, she doesn't need to change her approach all that much. Because once again, the story is more about Nishikata developing to become, like, the man that Takagi, needs, if you will. So her desire is to have Nishikata notice her as a woman. Even though they're middle schoolers, but romance stories, right? And I mean, technically you could argue that 13 is womanhood enough. But anyway, why is this not easy? Because Nishikata's an idiot. That's why it's not easy for her to have Nishikata notice her. And I remember I was watching the first episode of the anime, and some guy actually asked the question, why is Nishikata so stupid? And then someone else immediately responded to him with, because they're in middle school. duh, right? And of course, there's some obvious world building there, right? We're like, okay, middle schoolers, they're not gonna be as intellectually and emotionally intelligent as, say, an adult is supposed to be. Though, to be fair, I have seen a fair amount of adults act like middle schoolers. So what do I know? But going back to the story, you have you have two desires that they're actually compatible because it goes with the idea. The purpose of the two characters is basically to show. So Nishikata's desire appears to be a conflict at first, right? Because all he cares about is being smarter than Takagi. But in a way, by him constantly trying to figure out how to outsmart her, he is actually fulfilling. He is actually fulfilling that purpose for her. Because remember, the reason why Takagi's purpose of I want Nishikata to notice me as a woman, the reason why that's so difficult for her in the beginning is because he's an idiot. There's no other way of putting it. I mean, to be fair, he's a middle schooler. He's a middle school boy, especially. Middle school boys don't think about being in relationships. Not really. And so, throughout the story, as Nishika keeps trying to come up with new plans to outsmart her, and keeps failing because, once again, the reason why he can't outsmart her is because the conflict is that she's smarter than him. That's just something he has to accept. And so, those two like different desires, they're not necessarily conflicting desires, but they are very different from each other. After all, one is a very romance story based one, the other one isn't. Not really. But at the end, the desire still fulfills a purpose to the idea. And the idea is I want to tell a story about two middle schoolers falling in love. And so the purpose of that is through growth of two characters and how they get what they want in recognizing each other as, well, a man and a woman, basically. And then, of course, once again, the world of teasing Master Takagi isn't very big. It doesn't have to be that big. It's because, once again, you can do most of the world building with just the characters. Alright, so it's about how a girl wants to be more than friends with her friend that is a moron. You spelled moron wrong. You sure it's not Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal you're describing? And once again, Go-san, this is where, this is why tropes exist. Tropes just follow this thought process. And then you just plug in new things into these other factors, right? So, idea, two characters fall in love. You can have 1,000 different characters to personify this idea. This is where you get Carl Jung's Hero of 1,000 Faces kind of discourse. You can tell this so many ways, and I made this statement in the past, and I still stand by it because once again it hits on human nature. You could tell the same love story 1,000 times, and we'll eat that shit up every single time. And the reason is because, once again, as long as it achieves this primary objective of relate to the reader, then you can tell a story I don't know how many ways. Well, once again, Ghost, of course you know what a trope is. Everybody should know what a trope is. If you don't know what a trope is in any kind of literature, man, you gotta, you're screwed. But, the reason why is because, once again, there's an idea, and as long as you can relate it to the reader, and make the reader go yeah, I get it. And once again, this is why, tons of stories use the same formula. I didn't plan to use this as a case study, but My Dress Up Darling, exactly the same. Kitagawa Marin and Gojo Wakana, they fit in the same dynamic as Takagi and Nishikata. So Marin's purpose is she wants Gojo to notice her as a woman. That becomes her goal later in the story, because she, once again, there's two purposes in each story, because there's two stories being told, right? It's a story about becoming a great cosplayer, and it's also a love story. So the cosplayer story is Kirika wants to become a great cosplayer, and Gojo wants to become a Karashi doll maker. And then why is this not easy? Well, the reason why being a great cosplayer for Marin is not easy is because she sucks at sewing, which is an essential cosplayer skill. And the reason why Gojo, he's struggling with becoming a Karashi doll maker is, one, he's not very good at the face painting, and two, there's social stigma behind men and dolls. Well, there's a perceived social stigma. I should be more clear, because once again, Gojo's idea of that stigma comes from, like, when he was a kid, a girl called him out for being creepy for liking dolls, and then he associates that with, like, a social stigma. Like, there's a social level stigma. But then part of the story is that he figures that that's not true. And then, of course, we get to the romance side of My Dress Up Darling. So what is Marin's desire? For Gojo to recognize her as a woman. And then Gojo's desire is not as clear cut, because his thing is to prove himself to be someone worthy of affection. He cares about just making himself good enough so that so that someone will find him desirable in life. Of course, the dramatic irony is that we know Marin is already in love with him, but he doesn't know that. And so the part the audience has to, like, suffer through is like, come on, man, like, Marin, just tell him. Like, you would just automatically fulfill his desire of the story. But once again, the reason why this is not easy, for Marin's side, the reason why it's not easy is because she doesn't know she doesn't know how to approach a relationship. She actually doesn't know, and she struggles with that. She wants Gojo to notice her as a woman, but she actually doesn't know how to approach a relationship, which is why she always acts awkward whenever an opportunity comes up and then fails it. Basically, Marin is like the average guy who walks up to a girl and he has no idea what to do. So that's why a lot of girls experience guys. Sorry, ladies, I'm letting you know the reality, ladies. That the reason why when a guy walks up to you and he acts totally creepy is because he actually doesn't know what to do when it's time to talk to you. That's the reality. And so Marin is like a guy in that sense, in that she actually has no idea what to do when the time is right. And then she messes it up every single time. And so that's the reason why it's not easy for her. And then the reason why Gojo's conflict goes back to his other desire, because in that story there were two desires for the characters, is that he has low self-esteem because of his perceived idea of a social stigma towards men who make and play with dolls. And so there's that similarity between Takagi and My Dress Up Darling, where the woman wants a man to notice him, but the man is just too damn stupid to do it. Which is, I mean, the reason why this relates to readers so well, and why both... Okay, let me backtrack a bit. The reason why both these stories are as successful as they are, and why people like these stories, myself included, if you couldn't already tell, is that these stories do a great job relating to the reader. A reader can read these stories and be like, yeah, so true, I get it. And some people will even be like, yeah. A lot of girls probably read a story like this and go, yeah, that's me and all the dumbass men in my life, right? Women, be honest. I know you've thought that. and that's why these stories are so successful. um, is because the writer does a great job of relating to the reader. And that's your primary objective. No matter how good your idea is, if you skip these steps to try and relate to your reader, you're gonna fail. And now for some real fun. I'm gonna rip off all these other guys on YouTube who talk about why certain movies are so bad and why certain franchises are dying and blah blah blah, is because the big problem in modern writing is that writers are not doing this work. They're not doing the work of manifesting their idea in characters. They're not making clear and concise purpose and desire in their story. They don't world build enough to make a convincing conflict and why their conflict matters. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you fail at doing any of this, you fail to do this. You fail to relate to the reader. So we're going to talk about it. It's my turn to give the take on this mega hot take that's been on the internet for almost a decade now. Oh my god. I can't believe time just moves that fast. But Rey from Star Wars. And the reason why the new Star Wars trilogy is believed to be so bad and why so many people hate it and why people claim Rey as a Mary Sue is because, if you want to put it in bare bones explanation, is because the writers did not bother doing a lot of this whole thinking process that would have been necessary in order to make a convincing story to relate to your reader. So, idea. Well, first of all, you could easily pick the problem here, where some people go the whole, like, the Force is female discourse. So the idea of the new Star Wars is the Force is female. That would be the extreme take. But let's go with something a lot more modest and not sound like I'm just attacking shitty writers. Particular ones anyway. And also not just attacking bad ideas. But the idea of the new Star Wars movie is to try and recreate a sense of belonging in a sci-fi film. That is the idea. Create belonging in a sci-fi film. Character. That is where Rey comes in. She's a character who wants to find belonging. Oh, by the way, this is case study 4, by the way. Star Wars. So, Rey is the character that is meant to manifest the idea of belonging in a sci-fi world. Alright, so then what does that... Well, then the purpose part is kind of self-explanatory. What is the purpose? What is the desire of the character? To have belonging. And then... Well, once again, this is where, like, you can feel the laziness in this, right? I just said, okay, the idea was straightforward. And it self-explained the purpose. Belonging. So Rey wants to find belonging. But the problem with the Star Wars trilogy, the new one, well, I'm just going to refer to it as the Star Wars trilogy. Because it's not like Rey existed in the other 6, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, this desire part is not as clear as it should be. Because you think, like, if the idea is belonging, and then use space fantasy, you think that you think you could come up with a purpose pretty easily. But when you actually meet Rey in The Force Awakens, she is not even clear on this herself. What does she want? You actually, you kind of like, okay, I have an idea. You're expecting your parents to come back, I guess, from the stars? But I guess that's supposed to imply that you're about, like, finding your belonging and place in the universe. See, I had to make quite the logical jump to come to that conclusion. That wasn't spelled out to me very well, which is why some people think that this is why some people would make the claim that, like, oh, the writing is so bad in The Force Awakens. It's because they didn't do this. They didn't spell out Rey's desire very well. And so, okay, let's say you made that logical jump with the whole, like, Rey longs for her, like, she's expecting her parents to come back. which is supposed to express the idea that she desires belonging in the universe. Okay, let's say you made that logical jump. Okay, then you have to ask the question, well, why is this not easy? Why is this not easy? Well, part of it is she doesn't know who her parents even are. Which is like, I know a lot of people are being like, oh, the lack of knowledge or amnesia trope, blah, 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 right? It's like, okay, so Rey doesn't know. But you can't just leave it at that. You can't just leave it at like, okay, then you have to ask the question, why doesn't Rey know? Why doesn't Rey know who her parents are or who her family is? Oh, they abandoned her when she was young. Okay, well, why? Why did that happen? And this is where, like, the new Star Wars trilogy didn't do, like, anything when it came to world building. Because, of course, part of the problem is they assume... people assume the world building back in the idea section, where it's like, it's the Star Wars universe. You know, big galactic empires fighting and need a rebellion and all that. Even though, once again, the original trilogy had the whole, like, rebellion defeat the Empire. And then we had to make up a new empire called the First Order. And now there's a new rebellion because there's a new regime in the First Order. So we just recycle the story because we couldn't come up with anything new. So this is where Star Wars did the whole lazy, assume the world building was in the idea. Well, we're using the Star Wars universe. All the world building's been done for us. Instead of actually building a world for your story to work. And so you don't learn a damn thing about Rey and, like, you know, his family or her family or whatever. And why wouldn't Rey know who her family is? Okay, then it brings in, like, it uses assumptions from, like, the Star Wars mythos. So this is where, like, the cheating step of using the idea for your world building. Well, because it's Star Wars, there's going to be an evil empire that just kills a bunch of people. So that's why a lot of people don't have families. Like, it's so lazy. There's no reason why this is true in Rey's case. See, here's another big problem. And why Star Wars just fundamentally fails. Whereas all the other stories I referenced before do work. I need a new color. Let's use gray. Kind of a cheap color, but when you're world building, the flaw of why Star Wars' lack of world building just failed is because ultimately, since Rey's world was not built, not the Star Wars mythos, but Rey's context within the Star Wars universe, and that was not built. The reason why this matters is because then if you don't have Rey, let me back this up. Let me backtrack this. So the reason why the world building of Rey's particular context in the Star Wars mythos matters is because Rey needs personal stakes in the story. If she doesn't have personal stakes in the story, then anything that happens will not reflect on her desire very well. Because, like, you could ask the question, well, why is she bothering fighting the First Order? Well, because she has to. That's not a good answer. Because then the plot is not about Rey and this question. What does Rey want? It's not about that anymore. In good story writing, you gotta focus on this primary thing. I should probably use the text box for this and not try and use the crappy because I got it right here. Characters drive the plot. Characters drive the plot. Writing with a mouse always works. Characters drive the plot. Characters drive the plot. So, the reason why the Star Wars trilogy was so bad was because characters do not drive the plot. Like, Finn shows up because he's like
trying to escape the order and all that. And then like, what stakes are there for Rey and the idea that is being given? What stakes are there? There are no real stakes. It's just like Rey gets caught up in this other person's problem, which you can tell some stories that way, but you have to put a personal stake for your main character. If you don't have that personal stake, then who gives a crap? Why am I here? It's the whole like, yo Jesus, can you sort out some money issues between my brother and me? No. Why? What like, why should I bother? And yes, this is a real thing that happens in the Bible. Jesus is like, why? Why should I bother? Because even Jesus recognizes I have no stake in this. I'm not gonna waste my time with your petty little problem. And that's kind of like, see the reason why the Bible makes sense is because, yeah, that's how real people would act. If there's no stakes in it for your personal desires, well then who gives a shit, right? Like, you're not gonna bother. And so why does Rey bother? Oh, we gotta push the plot. We gotta push this idea of finding out who Rey is. Well, Rey hardly appears to care about that much. At least she doesn't care about it enough to spell it out for me. Well, it's probably because Rey wanted to parallel her story to Luke, but with Luke, at least he had a secret connection to the main plot. Well, actually, no, that's actually not the reason why Luke worked. Because you could also make the argument that Rey had a secret connection to the main plot, being the daughter of the Sith Lord, and her place in the universe. See, I immediately contradicted your idea. The reason why Luke worked, though, if we have to continue the character dive in, it's because Luke as a character drives the plot. So in A New Hope, when Luke talks about getting off Tatooine, he explicitly tells you that he wants to get off this godforsaken desert planet in the backwater of the galaxy. He'll do anything to get off this planet. And so the story doesn't even start altruistic. Like, Luke isn't a good, like, he's not even a hero in the beginning of his own story with that with that reasoning. His reason for doing anything is he wants to get off Tatooine, and that's something that the when the character world builds Tatooine and shows like it's a really crappy place to live on. You see, even in A New Hope, George Lucas pulled this off early. It relates to the reader. When people feel like, okay, I need adventure in my life because my life is boring as frick. That's the part that George Lucas related to in a lot of people. A lot of people can relate to the idea of being in a boring place in life and wanting adventure. So it shows Luke on a crappy ass planet that he doesn't like it. He's like, I don't want to be here. I want to go be a space pilot somewhere else. I don't want to be on this crappy desert planet. And then the call to action comes in Leia. And then once again, we get parts of Luke's personality which motivates the plot. This is where I made the point, of characters drive the plot. Sure, we all laugh about it because to be fair, in Luke's defense, he didn't know. But the semi-incestuous, interest in the princess, but he didn't know that was his sister at the time. But his personality, Luke as a character, he drives the plot. So he takes the message from Leia as like, you know what? That's my motivation. I'm getting the hell off this planet. And that's something that, once again, the reader can relate to that. It's like, yeah, if a hot girl came in my life, I'd change my life too. I changed the situation I was in. People can relate to that. And so what New Hope and how they differ hugely, though, is once again, Luke drives the plot. His character, his desire for having adventure off a crappy desert planet that is spelled out to the audience. This is where, once again, George Lucas went through this process. He made a clear purpose for Luke Skywalker. And then he also made clear opposition. Why is this not easy? Well, his way off the planet is to find a spaceship. Well, there's a spaceship called the Millennium Falcon. Well, the pilot's an asshole. He ain't just gonna take anybody anywhere. And so, there, conflict. Han Solo is conflict. And so, you immediately world build with other characters, which is the easiest way to world build, by the way, is you just make opposing characters. Refer to the quintessential quintuplet segment of the video for more info on that. But basically, Luke constantly runs into obstacles, and then he has to constantly redirect his purpose. And then, of course, this goes into a larger scale when we get to the second movie. But we're not just going to do the whole Star Wars dive thing. I still got a couple more case studies as we understand this flowchart. One more mark should do the trick. Let's use this darken red. The reason why a lot of people couldn't relate to Rey is because since Rey doesn't drive the plot, the reader, the audience cannot relate. Because Rey herself doesn't drive the plot. Based on the idea that we're given and her quote-unquote desire, she doesn't drive the plot. So the audience is kind of like, okay, cool space fight scene, but where you need to invest me in the story better. Luke's desire to leave boring home behind is fulfilled when he escapes with Han, and the others, while Kenobi's trying to fulfill his goal of saving Leia. It just had to come back to me. Yeah, that's exactly it though, right? And once again, the difference that I was getting at with the Star Wars case study is that in A New Hope, this part is actually fleshed out. This section. And then because they were able, because A New Hope could do this, it could do this, and then it could do this. But the problem with The Force Awakens is that they tried to make a character of Rey, but her desire, first of all, is not clear. And then this is where the people get into the whole Mary Sue discourse. A lot of the conflict is not personal stakes because Rey is just so super special awesome that like she doesn't have to train to like use the Force. Hell, she overpowers a person who has like years of experience being trained by a Jedi Master. Like, there's that whole thing about like, you tried to world build in your idea, the Star Wars mythos, and then you screw up that whole world build and make it mean like it don't mean a damn thing. A nothing character that somehow is able to overcome anything does make a bad movie. Star Wars is not the only one, it's just the most fun one to pick on. But there are other ones. Without making this sound like... Without beating all the old, like... There's already tons of YouTube videos on this, and people have explained this better than I have. But, like, you know, Captain Marvel is another example of this, where, like, once again, desire's not super clear, so conflict is kind of blurry, and then overcoming the redirecting purpose to overcome the conflict is like so crappily done. Whereas in good storytelling, characters drive the plot. Now, we will talk about a Fire Emblem game as our next case study. One that was... Because I only use the Engage reference when I was talking about like case study 1 with the Bible. But in case study 5, we're talking about Fire Emblem Three Houses and why this game actually worked. I know some people didn't like the gameplay because it was like too different from traditional Fire Emblem, which is actually what people liked about Engage, is that it did go back to more traditional Fire Emblem, minus the infinite enemy reinforcements that Mid cries like a baby about all the time. But aside from that, the reason why Three Houses actually worked was because the story was actually, it had a good idea, and it did most of this pretty well. Now, of course, I know some people may nitpick at Three Houses in that part of this was not done as well as it could have. But what Three Houses did achieve was that, one, it still told you a story where characters drive the plot. And then, in a way, what made Three Houses as popular as it was is because it was able to do this very well, despite the sloppiness here. So, using Three Houses, the idea is we're going to rip off the Three Kingdoms story, but Fire Emblem. Alright, that's your idea. So that means you need 3 primary characters to do that. Well, okay, so you made a comment that it's that some characters drive the plot more than others. Well, I'm gonna use this chart to show how that does work in this case. So, idea: we're recreating the Three Kingdoms story, which is a Chinese epic that is, it's one of those things that, like, it's a Chinese epic that everybody should read, because you can't watch an anime without some kind of reference to either the Three Kingdoms or Journey to the West or the Tale of Genji. But anyway, we're telling the Tale of Three Kingdoms story, but with Fire Emblem. All right, that's your idea. You personify it in 3 characters because it's the Three Kingdoms, so you need 3 characters, and that's Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude. What do they want? Each of them have very different desires. Edelgard wants to dismantle the religious order to rebuild a meritocracy within Fodlan. Fodlan is the land, by the way, but that doesn't matter right now. Dimitri's desire is to become a king worthy and admired by the people. That's Dimitri's desire, is to become a king worthy of the people. And then Claude's desire is to change Fodlan's relationship with the outside world, and that the world, and to show the rest of Fodlan that the world is a much bigger place than Fodlan. So those are their desires. Okay, why is this not easy? So we have to go through each story. Why is Edelgard's objective of dismantling the religious order and creating a meritocracy? Why is this not easy? Well, one, the religious order is like the dominant order in the land, so you can't just how are you gonna topple that? That's Edelgard's first question, right? Like how am I gonna topple this big enemy? Not unite the land as much. Claude's is more about expanding the world views of the people of Fodlan. I'll talk more about. I'll expand a little bit more on that as we go into the opposition side. So, when Edelgard, one of her big why this is not easy, is because the religious order is the dominant culture. The Church of Saros is huge. You're gonna have to topple that somehow, and so. That's why it's not easy. Okay. Well, why does that matter? How is the church the dominant power? Why is that the case? Well, then that's where you tell a history of Fodlan. You have this whole, there are the saints, and then there was the god Sothis and all that. And I was mainly taking my best guess. Well, once again, it's hard to express all that in a few text boxes. But anyway, continuing on. So, world building. Okay, you have to build at the Church of Saros. Okay, if toppling the Church of Saros is not going to be easy, you have to world build that the Church of Saros is a big deal. Which, guess what? It is. It's got a central. The Garrick Mach Monastery is this, like, it's supposedly a monastery, but it's also like a giant fortification in the middle of the continent, with like super advantageous terrain. Just ever in case they are attacked, which is exactly what happens. And so, like, you have to establish that the Church of Saros is powerful. And so Garrick Mach and its relation with the other kingdoms, that is part of why you do the academy phase. As much as people get annoyed that you have to play the academy phase repeatedly, no matter which route you pick, So playing the game multiple times gets annoying because of that. But from a narrative standpoint, the reason why the monastery phase is so important is to establish how powerful the Church of Saros actually is. World building. Yeah, right. Okay, then you have to ask the other question. Okay, why is the whole meritocracy thing not easy? The crest are the problem, right? And so the crest system, you have to world build the crest system, and why it makes meritocracy, Edelgard's idea of meritocracy, a problem. As a matter of fact, in a different route, this is actually explored more. In the Blue Lions route, the Dimitri story, which we'll cover more about him in a minute, Dimitri actually directly points out why there's a huge problem in Edelgard's desire, and by extension her philosophy. If you're going to build a meritocracy, then the people with crests will naturally climb to the top and then abuse that power. So your new system will not change anything. And Edelgard's like, no, that's not how I envisioned it. You're just wrong, Dimitri. This is why some people thought Edelgard was kind of out of line with that kind of logic. It's like, no, Dimitri's got a good point. And it is a real reason why there's real conflict in Edelgard's desire of building a meritocracy within Fodlan. Because once again, the same people that she had problems with would naturally take over that system. So that's why I keep saying in my Fire Emblem videos about why Edelgard's philosophy was so stupid. Because Edelgard, whether this was intentional or not in her writing, she overlooked that particular detail of Fodlan's culture. Whether that was... See, this is where, like, once again, the world building... how do you know it won't backfire? I got a feeling it will. Yeah, that's basically how that conversation goes down in Blue Lions. And so that's Edelgard's whole stakes in this. So her desire is conflicted because the Church of Saros is a thing. So that's why she believes her redirected purpose. Edelgard believes this is why the Church of Saros must come to an end. Because as long as they're around, then this old system that we have, this whole system, it'll never go away if the Church of Saros is around. So that's why I have to dismantle it completely. That's part of Edelgard's thought process. So in a way, that's why Edelgard drives the plot in all three routes. And that's why she's the most fleshed out character. Is because this affects all the routes. Edelgard's primary objective of dismantling the Church of Saros to create a new culture, it drives the plot. And that is something readers can get behind. That is an idea that, like, even if you don't agree with Edelgard's thought process, one, the story writes her in a way that you can relate to her as a person, even if you disagree with her ideology. And second, the story does a good enough job to convince me that Edelgard sees that as the only solution to the problem. Even if you disagree with Edelgard, you can understand that Edelgard is convinced that this is the only route of action that she can take, which is why she justifies slaughtering, masses of people. And why Edelgard is fine with just leading the rest of Fodlan to ruin with this new Adrestian war. And so Edelgard drives the plot, and the reader can relate. And when I say relate, this is the reason why I brought the Fire Emblem case study. An important thing to remember as well. Just because if your story relates to a reader, that doesn't have to mean that your reader has to agree with you. After all, most writers, an honest writer, I should say, is self-conscious enough to know that, of course, not all of your audience is going to agree with you. This is where, just go back to case study number 1 with the Bible. And the biblical writers were totally aware that the average reader would not agree with them on a lot of their ideas.
And we see that manifest in the world today. If I went around saying, okay, most humans are inherently bad. Most people say, no, that's not true. Humans are inherently good. It's society that makes them bad. Now, we can have those different opinions. But what the Bible does achieve in its writing is to create a relatable reason as to why the Bible thinks the way that it does. That humans are not inherently good. That is kind of one of the points the Bible makes. Is that humans, and the reason, and the whole, and by extension, since humans are not inherently good, that's why they reject God's goodness. That's the logic the Bible is trying to make. And the Bible does a good job of convincing you why they think that. Through the person of God. Whereas you don't have to agree with that. But what the Bible does do a good job of is that it creates convincing case studies with characters such as David, Samson, and all these other people that like. This is how humans would behave if they thought they could do better than God. And that is the Bible's way of saying this is our way of arguing that humans are not inherently good. And so it's funny where people say I can relate to people in the Bible to point out that like, okay, maybe we aren't so good either. And that is what the Bible tries to achieve. In the same way in Fire on the Three Houses, it convinces you that this is how the characters think. Now, you may not personally agree with it, but the logic of why characters think the way they do is consistent, one. And two, it's something that a reader could be like, okay, yeah, I can see why you think that. You've convinced me that that's why you think that way. And that's very important in writing. If you can't convince your reader, your audience, to see why you think the way you do, then that's why readers lose interest in a story. They're like, okay, like even if I do agree with your premise, if it's not convincing as to why characters think and act the way they do, then you're separate from you've emancipated yourself from the media. And so, once again, relating to readers, Three Houses actually did this pretty well. To be fair, though, they did have a working template, using the Tale of Three Kingdoms and then just changing that story. Tale of Three Kingdoms is an epic that lots of people have beloved for years, because of how it really drives character motivation and really spells that out well. So Fire on them Three Houses just used that template, made up their own characters to go with it, and did an okay job. Sure, there were some sloppy parts in the world building, but that's just how it is. Speaking of sloppy world building, though, that's where we get into the Blue Lions route. So, where Edelgard's purpose and desire are kind of grandiose, they're meant to be like for the sake of an entire people. Dimitri's purpose is a personal one, and his desire is a personal one. He wants himself to be viewed as a king worthy of the people. He wants to be a good man, basically. But why is this not easy? This is where the world building and the flashback of Dimitri being a bad guy comes in. And this is also done with other characters. Why is Felix so hostile toward Dimitri? Why do some of the other Blue Lions walk on eggshells around him, even though Dimitri's generally a pretty nice guy? Is because people know what he's really like. Dimitri has a personal problem, which fits the setting. If his desire is personal, compared to Edelgard's, which is more like social, if Dimitri has a personal goal, then your conflict needs to be a personal one, which is actually why a lot of people like the Blue Lions. They actually nailed this part pretty well. And so why is this not easy for Dimitri? Well, he has a personal problem. He has anger issue. He has trauma issue.
he's kind of not a good guy himself. He's overly self-righteous at times. Um, he lacks emotion. He lacks emotional maturity to be able to find help for his trauma. He lacks a lot of qualities that would allow him to become someone worthy of the people, and by extension be king. He lacks those qualities. And so the world building is all the flashback, the trauma, his inability to relate to some people. That's the world. Dimitri's conflict is a personal one. So his world building is a lot more personal. And so that's why Dimitri has that whole journey in his story where he's kind of lost himself. He's just become someone consumed by rage until someone else has to die for him so that Dimitri will wake up to, I have to see my actions not just for my personal feelings, but I have to take other people into account for my actions. How are you going to be a king worthy of the people if you don't view your actions as mattering to those same people? That's the revelation Dimitri has. And so that is also something that, once again, characters drive the plot. Dimitri drives the plot. His actions have direct consequences. And of course you have to emphasize those kind of direct consequences when your character's desires are a very personal one. And so Dimitri's actions have direct consequences. And then that's something the reader can relate to. Sure, not all of us go around, crushing people's skulls with our bare hands. But we can relate to a guy who's troubled by his past. And we can relate to a guy when we realize some of the mistakes in our lives are caused because we did not put other people's feelings into considerations when we commit certain actions. That's very relatable. And if you do a good job of doing that, that's why people love Dimitri. That's why he's so beloved. That's why the Blue Lion story is so beloved. Because on that personal level, Three Houses did a really good job of exploring that. Then let's do our third character, Claude. So Claude's purpose and his desire in the story is that he wants to change the world view of the people. He doesn't want Fodlan to exist only for themselves. So where Dimitri had to struggle with his relationship to the people, Claude's belief is that people need to change the relationship of the part of the world they live in, and not consider, like, how do I word this? And not consider the larger world, people outside. Your actions have direct consequences. And so, but on a larger scale. Well, if you're going to tell a story about accountability on like a continental level, well, you're going to have to do a lot more world building. You're going to have to make your world look a lot bigger. Which is where I've made this point before. Not on my own streams, actually, but on a buddy, his stream, where I talk about how one of the things about the Verdant Wind story is that it did a lot more with the world of, like, Fodlan. And the reason it did was because it had to, in order to explore this idea of how Fodlan is supposed to relate to the outside world. Well, that means you have to build what Fodlan is like. You have to explore the idea that there is a bigger world out there. Okay. But then then you have to go back to, why is this not easy? Why isn't it easy for Fodlan just to communicate with the outside world? Well, one, there's the deceit that Edelgard gives about the religious order. The religious order doesn't really care. Edelgard twists this idea and says that Edelgard twists that idea by saying, well, actually, the Church of Saros hates the outside world, which is actually not true. Edelgard lied about that. But there is some, the half-truth that she does give is that, well, it's because the Church of Saros doesn't care that much. And there's other reasons for that, right? That's the whole Rhea's immaturity problem, which I don't want to dive into that right now. But Rhea's immaturity on a personal level is why the Church of Saros becomes stagnant. And then part of that stagnation leads to, well, we don't really care about the outside world. We're fine. We're all fine just huddling in our part of the world. Fodlan can just stay as Fodlan forever. But that's not how real life is. But going back to the Verdant Wind, that's the reason why it's not easy for Claude to achieve his goals, because due to long years of tradition and the immaturity of the Archbishop, people have no interest in interacting with the outside world. And so Claude's desire is to change that. And so that's why he makes alliances with Nader and the Almirans. and of course, on a personal level, his supports are with all the foreign women. That came out wrong. With all the foreign women, because Claude cares about connecting people of different people groups, and so his redirected purpose is that he needs to show himself as a person who's open-minded, which is why they straight up character assassinated him in Three Hopes, because then he just sides with Edelgard, which is like, that's the equivalent of like just saying the closed-minded person you know is actually correct about foreign affairs. It's like, no. But in Three Houses, Claude is very open-minded, and so he reciprocates that with others. That he wants to be open-minded, because if he wants other people to be open-minded, he himself must be open-minded. And so that's something that readers can relate to. It's like, yeah, if I'm going to expand my ideas on a large scale to other people, I need to be open-minded. And that's why a lot of people like Claude. For that reason, is because, yeah, the need to be open-minded. That's something we can all agree on. And so that's how Three Houses really did a pretty decent job with exploring this thought process in storytelling through their different protagonists. And yes, I'm not counting Byleth as a protagonist. Byleth is the plot device of how... Byleth is the shortcut to dealing with conflict, which is why people don't like Byleth. But... Byleth is like, yeah, Byleth is basically the shortcut to dealing with the problems. Whereas, like, once again, the three main lords of Three Houses, they follow this pretty well. And I think that's where Three Houses resonated with people. Even though, like, yeah, parts of the story's sloppy, but every story has, like, sloppy moments. And the gameplay's kind of, like, meh. It's kind of mid. But but at least the writers followed this thought process, and that's what made Three Houses work. We got 2 more case studies on how to write, and case study number 6. Ghost Hunter already called it, because this is me we're talking about, and it's still fresh in my memory. So we're talking about Warcraft 3 and how Warcraft 3 did a really good job on building one of gaming's most famous villains, Arthas Menethil. So the idea of the story, the idea that Warcraft gives, Warcraft 3 in particular, is to subvert the humans and orcs good guy bad guy dynamic. So, I mean, to be fair, there's already a lot of world building already done in Warcraft. But unlike Star Wars, where they just kind of recycled it with their idea, Warcraft 3 wanted to make a new idea
with established lore that exists. And the new idea that Warcraft 3 came up with was, how do we change the dynamic of the humans and the orcs, and instead of just making humans good, orcs bad? How are we gonna tell this story? So you have the characters. You have the humans and the orcs. But what Warcraft does, which is pretty brilliant, is it takes a character to represent those two sides. So for the humans, that would be Arthas Menethil. And for the orcs, that would be Thrall. Alright, what do they want? Well, Thrall's easier to explore as a character. So Thrall has a simple desire. That's why we're going to start with him first. Thrall wants the orcs to be free and to have a place to call... He wants the orcs to be free from the human oppression. Because the orcs lost the Second War in Warcraft 2. So he wants the orcs to be free. Why is this not easy? Well, the orcs are dispirited because they got their asses handed to them in Warcraft 2. There's the tumultuous history within the Horde. So in Warcraft, a lot of lore diving. The whole problem of like the pre-established world building. But they bring it back and they make it mean something in Warcraft 3. So I have to preface that when I go into this part. So the reason why it's not easy for the Horde to be free is because they had old alliances with various factions. And one of those factions was a big problem. A bunch of demons, basically. One of the alliances that the orcs had were with a bunch of demons. And in Warcraft 2, that was represented by a character named Grom Hellscream, who is also a major character in the orc sections of Warcraft 3, at least the first half. Well, in the main orc part of Warcraft 3, because this is that second bonus campaign, which I haven't played on the channel, but that's less to do with like the orcs actually having conflict and more about like the building of the orc capital, which would be used for World of Warcraft. But anyway, okay, why is Thrall's desire for the orcs to be free not easy? Well, Grom Hellscream's still around, and Grom was a big part of like that whole demon alliance with the orcs, which is not good for the orcs, and that alliance did add other forms of enslavement. So while you could be enslaved to the humans on a physical level, they were enslaved to the demons on a spiritual level. So that's another reason why the whole Thrall wanting freedom for the orcs is not easy, because freedom is not just a physical thing. There's a metaphysical thing, and that would be the link with the demons. So, well, that's not easy. So, alright, we got to redirect purpose. Introduce new character, the Prophet. Well, it's just spoiler at this point. You can just watch the Warcraft Let's Play. It's fresh on the channel. Medivh shows up and he tells Thrall, if you want to save your people, you gotta go sail west to a place called Kalimdor. So redirect purpose. Okay, if the reason why orcs can't be free because the humans are around, well, we gotta fix that. How are we gonna fix that? Let's go sail away to a land where there are no humans. That sounds like a good plan, which is what kicks off the prologue and kicks off the game. Then, well, you can, the old saying, you can run but you can't hide. So the orcs can never truly be free. Because one, in the past, the orcs were always established to be like bloodthirsty and violent. So they go to Kalimdor, and what's the first thing they encounter? More violence. It may not be with humans, but there's violence. And so there's a personal, like, there's a personal unease with Thrall, where he's like, is this our fate? Is our fate just to fight all the time? I mean, it's a game called Warcraft, so I mean it's kind of in the title. But that's kind of the conflict that Thrall has. Is like, what does it mean to be like? Can we truly be free?
Is that a real possibility for the orcs? And so once again, the desire of Thrall to be free, and then the world building establishes that there's multiple layers of what the orcs have to fight for in order to be free. Physical displacement, but that's not enough. Dealing with other cultures that are not too dissimilar in that whole violent nature when they ran into like the quill boar and the centaur. And then of course there's also the spiritual level. There's still ties to the demons that hold the orcs back. And so these two the conflict and desires, they keep repurposed, they keep running into each other, and there's reactions and redirected purpose. And so okay, one way to deal with some of the conflict of the war culture, they meet the Tauren, and the Tauren are a very peaceful shamanistic group, but they know how to be vicious when they have to protect their land. And so Thrall decides to ally with them, and they grow a bond between them, that they find a way to relate to each other. And that's through that whole like shamanistic sense of code of honor. And so that's one way to deal with the whole like violent culture. Maybe digging into these more peaceful shamanistic roots in orc culture that they learned from the Tauren. Well, that's part of it. Okay, then there's the whole like dealing with the humans. Okay, displacement isn't enough because the humans also sailed westward. All right, what do? We gotta do something that we never thought we would ever do. We'd have to ally with the humans to fight demons and to fight demons corrupting orcs. Oh yeah, because remember the whole demon corrupting orcs thing is a conflict in the story? How do we deal with that conflict, right? We gotta save Grom Hellscream. Put him in the Master Ball and bring him to the Circle of Power. And so the world, even though there was all the established Warcraft lore, what made the Orc campaign work so well was because it still added personal elements to Thrall and his desire to see the Horde free. So, once again, he's told, but he still is the one that like leads the Horde. He's told to take the rest of the Horde west. So Thrall gives the order. He drives the plot. His desire to ally with the Tauren, and him getting to know Karen. Characters drive the plot. Their motivations, they have different motivations, but they plan to help each other, and that's what creates the alliance. Characters drive the plot, and then of course, there's the battle against the spiritual aspect of orc freedom. Grom gets possessed. He gets corrupted by the blood of Manaroth. And now Thrall has to fight his own people and then free Grom from this taint. To save Grom. And so Thrall has a personal stake in it. And that's where, once again, the Warcraft does a good job of relating to the audience Thrall's desire to try and find peace, to find freedom, and the cost that it would take to have that freedom. The idea of being free. Everybody wants to have freedom in their life and not be enslaved to whether it's corporatism or crappy relationships or whatever else in life. But what the Orc campaign establishes is that you still have, those are things that you have to fight for. You can never, freedom has a price and you have to be willing to fight for it. And Thrall was willing to do that. And that's something that like any person can relate to. Now on the flip side, you have Arthas, where the whole subversion thing, back to the idea, because there's two sides of the story. So the orcs no longer being the savages when they finally kill Manaroth, and then they're free of the demon taint. And then the humans are not always good, and so it tells a typical corruption of, the highway to hell is paved with good intentions. with Arthas. So Arthas starts out as a pretty good, relaxed guy. The Prince of Lordaeron. And he's got to go deal with some, demon worshipping orcs. But then, of course, he's got to run into, like, a magic plague that's, like, killing people and even turning them to the undead. And so Arthas goes around chasing these cultists. So before I continue on, what is Arthas's purpose in the story? Or what's his desire? He wants to protect the people. It's his duty, and his motivation is because that's his duty. If he's going to be king one day, he has to be someone who protects the people. So, he starts as a pretty good guy. He wants to protect the people. He wants to be good to his subjects, as any decent king would want. Well, why is this not easy? Orcs on the horizon. As Thrall broke out the original Orcish horde, and they thought they would have to go to war with them again. And now there's this like magic plague, turning people to zombies. So, yeah, you can't really be a good king, a good future king to the subjects of your kingdom, if they're turning into zombies like every other week. So Arthas tries to deal with the plague until the infamous Culling of Stratholme chapter, where the people of Stratholme, one of the largest cities of the country of Lordaeron, the kingdom, I guess, they're all, like, tons of people are infected. And so Arthas is like, we gotta kill everybody. The town, the city must be purged. Line. And so his redirected purpose, he thinks he's still protecting the people by fighting the plague. But his redirected purpose, it is not a good one. He doesn't have a good redirection. And so, because he had to kill all these people, he justifies himself because there's Mal'Ganis of the Scourge. And then now he has a new purpose. The part of the redirected purpose is not just about fighting for the people, but for revenge. And Arthas is still convinced that he's doing it for the people, to be a good king for them one day. And so, hey, having vengeance on an evil demon who turned like a bunch of your city's people to zombies, yeah, that sounds like that's a sound plan. That's something readers can relate to. The idea of getting revenge for people doing awful things. May not necessarily be turning a bunch of your townspeople into zombies, but there are people out there like Mal'Ganis who do pretty awful things. May not necessarily be, sucking people's blood and turning them to zombies, but there are evil people out there. And so Arthas's motivation is very relatable. And of course Arthas drives the plot a lot more than Thrall drives the orc plot. Like Arthas, everything is like, because Arthas is so bent on revenge. So you play through the rest of the human campaign, and so Arthas, he goes to Northrend because he's so driven by revenge. And then like the ending of the campaign is where like you really see that dark twist in Arthas. He decides to screw his own men over and not allow them to go home. And by extension disobeys a direct order from his father, the king. And then the consequence of that is that now the people are stuck until Arthas gets what he wants. And so Arthas drives the plot. He drives the plot. And then you finish the last level of Frostmourne, you kill Mal'Ganis, and then the next campaign you play as the very people you were fighting, but as Arthas again. And so Arthas now, he changes. And now he's got a new purpose, new desire. And that is, it's funny, what's funny about it is that it still has that little bit of, there's a remnant, if you will, of that whole being a king worthy of his subjects. But now he has new subjects, the undead. And so he goes around and he wants to be someone that's like worthy of like his title as like King Arthas. But of course, he's caught up in another problem. Why is this not easy for him to become king? Well, one, he's undead. The kingdom that he was supposed to take over is all in ruin because of him. And now, because of some jackass dreadlord named Tichondrius, Arthas had been turned into an errand boy. And so Arthas, he does what the dreadlords tell him, but he is not having a good time while he's doing it. Because he's now an errand boy. So the conflict is Arthas is no longer in control. And so what the story does pretty well is that Kel'Thuzad comforts Arthas in the idea of not being in control. Because he's like, well, the Lich King has been planning all these kind of things, and with all the Lich King's knowledge and foresight, even if you're not in control, you can still take advantage of every situation you're in. Fast forward to, we're gonna ignore the Night Elf stories, because this case study is long enough as it is. We're gonna skip to the final campaign of the Undead, where now that the Legion had been defeated, in the part that I skipped with the Night Elves, now Arthas is ready to, once again, be king. Be king of a broken kingdom, but king nonetheless. That's his desire. He wants to be king. And he asserts that title onto himself in the first map, appropriately named King Arthas. And so, as king, he's going to establish his rule in Lordaeron. However, of course, new problem. Lich King's in trouble. We gotta go save him, right? And the world building was all done in the Night Elf campaign, which I'm gonna leave that alone, but the point I'm gonna just make here is that Illidan, through the Night Elf and the Blood Elf campaign, he's been tasked to destroy the Lich King. So he creates a natural conflict to Arthas, who, serves the Lich King. So now Arthas has to deal with Illidan, because Illidan's going to try and kill the Lich King. However, Arthas does not forget his true purpose, that he wants to be king. And so that's why the ending of Warcraft 3 happens the way that it does. Arthas defeats Illidan. He had proven himself to be someone worthy of the title of king. Not some old dead orcish warlock stuck in a block of ice, but rather Arthas feels he can be the king and rule the scourge. And that's why Arthas does what he does at the end, where he breaks the ice and takes the helm of domination for himself. Because he decides that he would make a better king, a better Lich King, than Ner'zhul. And that's something that the reader can relate to. That it's easy to have good intentions and become a bad guy out of it. It's also pretty relatable that as you grow older in life and you've been doing something long enough, you feel that you would do a better job than your superiors. And that's what makes Arthas a great villain. Because it's a reality we don't like to think in ourselves, that like that selfish hubris. But Arthas portrays that very well, and he does it in a way that one is convincing. That because you are the one who Arthas had to fight Illidan, not Ner'zhul. So if Arthas had to fight this super powerful demon hunter who's lived for over 10,000 years and was empowered by a magical warlock skull, you'd be like, Arthas, you deserve that Lich King title. You earned it. Just like how many of us may feel in life, we're like, no, we earned our place in life. When you get like a promotion at work or something, you feel like, I earned it. That's something that's very relatable in Arthas. And so Arthas driving the plot to
succeed the Lich King because he felt he was a more worthy Lich King. It's something very relatable. It's something that anyone would relate to. And that's good writing, even in a villain protagonist, in Arthas. Oh, that was a long one. Alright, our final case study. And what's funny about this is that, like, this is where, one of the most difficult parts of writing, especially if you make, like, an extended universe, like a larger universe and, like, how many characters and world building you want to do, it can get real tough, especially if you've been writing for a long time. And that would be, the case study we're going to do is D4DJ. And kind of like an overview on my Christmas series, if you guys haven't watched that already. And I'll go over the central thesis of that series again, as well as like elaborate on some points that I may have missed last time. So, D4DJ has an idea. And you're probably, how do you make an idea for a transmedia? Well, the transmedia idea is to create personalities for the real life band members, if that makes sense. So I made the analogy before where, like, okay, Samugi Riza is the DJ and lead singer of Photon Maiden, a real life singing group. However, when she's on stage, she plays a character named Izumu Saki. So when D4DJ made First Mix and then Groovy Mix and All Mix and so on, Petite Mix and Double Mix and all the other transmedia, there's even like a manga that, there's 2 mangas actually. I think they're making I heard there was like I heard there's more than just 2, but I do know of 2 manga that exist of D4DJ. Both of them are origin stories of Peaky Peak. Well, one's Peaky Peak and the other one is Photon Maiden. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So, when First Mix and All Mix were made, and Groovy Mix, the idea behind it was they wanted to create fictional counterparts to the characters that are played on stage that the real life seiyus do. So the characterization is kind of easy. You have a band member, you have a made up name for them, and now you just have to explore that. So what is the purpose? The purpose is to create characters, larger characters, on a meta level for the characters on stage. So that's the purpose. But why is this not easy? Well, you have to make up scenarios in their world that would force character development so Bushiroad can achieve this desire. And that's right. I picked D4DJ because I'm going meta with this one. So the world of D4DJ goes story by story in order to build individual characters. Because once again, Bushiroad as a main character, if you will, the corporation as a character, that's weird to think, right? But they're trying to achieve a goal of creating fictional personalities for their band members. And so that's why when you create conflict, you have to establish certain rules in their world and how those rules interact with characters. And so in any given time, when you try and create, in any given time, in any given story in Groovy Mix, you take one of the characters, you take a quality you want to say a particular character has, and then you have to really expand that and try and construct a scenario for the characters of why this is important and how we use that to build identity. So the example I'm going to use 2 examples from Groovy Mix. The first one is the cute girl and the scary me. I talked about this story in my another D4DJ tier list, where I talked about the cross-unit relation stories.
And this is the story between Noah and Kurumi. Now, throughout a lot of early D4DJ, they established that Noah being a cool girl and her, bookworm know-it-all is actually kind of a facade. And that in reality, Noah is like a total freak. Whereas she obsesses over like cute things. And that often happens with cute girls, because after all, Noah is a cute girl in a cute girl anime. So it's going to happen a lot. So at first, when they made Groovy Mix, this is just kind of a character trait Noah has. That she freaks out over the cuteness of other characters. And we went with 2 years of just Noah doing this. But when they made the cute girl and the scary me story, they decided to explain where this comes from. And so the desire of Bushiroad, if you will, is to define Noah's character. Well, why is this hard? Well, first of all, you have lots of other... Why is this not easy? First, we got a lot of other characters to explore. And so you can't just like... When would be an appropriate time to establish Noah's primary characteristic? That she freaks out over cute girl things. World building. Where's world building play into this? How does Noah treat each girl throughout D4DJ and all the different cute girls, and how does she react to different characters and whatever? This was a slow burn throughout Groovy Mix's storytelling, that Noah would keep, acting the way that she does around different girls. And especially, there's one girl that she does this a lot more with than other characters. Well, there's two of them. There's Saki, who she's already spent enough time with in Photon Maiden, because they're in the same unit. But then there's also Kurumi of Lyrical Lily. And why does Noah talk to Kurumi the way that she does? Well, there's an implied closeness that these characters know each other a lot more than she knows other characters. And two, the story wants to also establish that Kurumi herself is like a super cute girl. So you're nailing two birds with one stone, basically. But we still need to really get into, well, why is Noah this way? Then we have to create a new conflict and establish, and then based on world building, based on parts of the world building you've already done. We need a new conflict based on what we've already built with like years of Groovy Mix. So the story begins with Noah going to Kurumi's house, because apparently they hang out often. But the world building didn't tell me that, so I just have to assume this is a thing. You can also take some notes from Groovy Mix on bad writing as well. I didn't do a lot of bad writing cases other than Star Wars, but D4DJ does have its bad writing problems. But the new conflict has to assert that, okay, Noah visits Kurumi often. Now, Kurumi, being the cute little high school girl that she is, decides to we're going to do some occulty hypnotism things, because that's something that apparently Japanese high school girls do, because they're weird like that. Go watch my Halloween video for more context. But anyway, Kurumi hypnotizes Noah, but she's not very specific. Instead, Noah somehow convinces herself that everything that she thought was cute is now scary. And there's that whole wordplay of kawaii and kawaii. So, there's that. That's why the story's called The Cute Girl and the Scary Me. But anyway, so Noah starts freaking out on everything that's cute and thinks of it as scary, which is all the time, because remember, Noah's a cute girl in a cute anime girl world. And so now she has to figure out why. Now the other Photon Maiden girls get concerned about this, and they have to figure out why she freaks out. And secondly, how to get her out of her, trance. And what you learn is that basically, you get that whole that cool bookworm know-it-all facade that we thought was a facade, was actually the real Noah once upon a time. That Noah was not very good socially. She's a bookworm know-it-all. And she was very standoffish because of that. And so Noah herself realized that she needed to change. Otherwise she would grow up to be a loner. And so she decided she would dedicate her life to cute things after meeting Karumi one day. And so from there, Noah reminds herself, wait a minute, yeah, that's who I am. That's who I've become. I've become, this freak, and I acknowledge that, who loves cute things. And then that's what allows Noah to snap out of it. And so here, characters drive the plot. Noah consistently drives the plot in her obsession with cuteness, and then her attitude toward that changes, and then her actions of freaking out over cute things, viewing them as scary, drives the other Photon Maiden girls into action. So characters drive the plot. Noah's actions directly have direct consequences. And then we learn about, Noah and her past, which is something a lot of readers can relate to. If you have certain personality traits that make you standoffish, and so you find ways to change yourself. That's something people can get behind. Not everybody's a total freak like Noah, and you don't want to be because you probably don't want to go to jail. Because Noah should be in jail, for real. Especially when she's spying on this elementary school kids. It's mad sus. But Noah is very relatable in that story. Another D4DJ story that covers this pretty well is I'm trying to remember which story it is. See, it's like I had to use the cross relation story again. It's the Sweet Time Drifts Lazily, the Rei Esra one. And once again, trying to create Bushiroad's desire is to establish Rei's character. And Rei there was a lot of time for Rei to be developed as a character, because Rei is a character that was, since like episode 1 of First Mix. As a matter of fact, a bit of trivia, Rei is the first character you actually see on screen in First Mix. Even though she's technically the 4th member of Happy Around. But what did Bushiroad want with Rei's character? They wanted to build a character that went through like the typical, like, how do I put this? They were gifted, a gifted student that quit because of pressure. And so Rei was very skilled piano player, but eventually you learn that like she didn't pursue it seriously. And then of course Groovy Mix had flirted for like well over 2 years about the Rei story. Well, what happened to Rei? What's this underlying narrative of Rei and her piano playing and her relationship with her mom and all that? There's this underlying dynamic going on that Bushiroad didn't answer for years, until we get Sweet Time Drifts Lazily. And that's where they wanted to establish they wanted to establish Rei's identity as a character. Minus the fun little cute girl adventures, because D4DJ has a lot of that. So the purpose was for Rei to make Rei a character that one was relatable in the whole like talented youngsters who crumble under pressure, but also create a redemption arc for that kind of character. And this works really well because, skipping to relate to the reader, that's something a lot of people need in their lives.
We all have those moments where, like, you could have done something, but for one reason or another, you failed to do it. And that probably traumatized you to never do it again. But of course, D4DJ is kind of inconsistent in this because Ray still plays the piano for like 2 years real time before dealing with this problem of hers. So what is Ray's desire? Ray's desire is to get back into piano playing on a serious level. Well, why is this not easy? Well, because she has some unresolved trauma. Okay, what trauma is that? World building. Flashback. You learn that when Ray was in middle school, she was at a piano recital, and she froze while she was playing. And she felt like she couldn't do it again in a public setting. Although once again, D4DJ immediately contradicts this because she becomes part of Happy Around. But I guess, like, I don't know. See, this is where D4DJ fumbles its own writing sometimes. But the world building is Ray has trauma, and it comes from, like, freezing when she was younger. Esra enters the pic. This is where Esra is important to the story. Esra redirects purpose in Ray's motivation. Instead of what is hindering me from playing piano is kind of Ray's problem in the conflict. Esra redirects that and says, how do you relate? How do you relate to piano playing? What does it mean to you? Don't think of just the action of playing piano. Think about why you do it. And so when Ray reflects on that, she realized that, like, well, I love music. And I always have. And so Esra redirects that and says, hey, then show your love for music when you play. Don't just play because you have to, but play because you love it, and show the world that you love it. Which is where, at the end of the story, Ray does the piano recital, and she ad-libs part of the song, which was very unprofessional in, like, music recitals. But at the same time, Ray felt good about it. She felt like, yes, this is what I live for. To play music because I love it, not because I have to. And so Ray drives the plot. And Esra helps her get there. And Esra's actions are directly caused by Ray's actions. Which is why people love Esra's character so much, because Esra really knows how to react to other people. Which is why people like her so much. And Ray's traumatic past is, and the fight to overcome it, is something that readers can relate to. You need to be able to relate to your reader. And so, those are some case studies on how to write, and writing stories, and writing prose. You have to keep this kind of thing in mind. I mean, I've had this thing up for, like, over an hour now. But if you really need me to, like, save this somewhere and then maybe, like, give you a copy, I can always somehow... Well, I have Discord to file transfer. So there's that. But, I mean, also, you could just snapshot this. And this is just, like, a very introductory level of how to write your story. And more importantly, the reason why I wanted to go over these particular beats in the creative process is that these are the questions you have to ask yourself all the time when you write a story. You always have to ask yourself, what do your characters want? And why is it not easy? And then you constantly have to balance those things and to make sure you don't lose sight of your idea. Because you don't want to lose your audience. Because the number one objective of writing is to captivate an audience. After all,
I mean, a big part of why do people even write at all is to be read. So that's my quick, that was my quick end notes. It is 6 o'clock now, which means we're gonna end the stream here. Hope you guys learned something with all this me rambling about how to write stories. But I hope you guys learned something. And if you guys ever do your creative projects, if you guys write something, you know, always keep this in mind. But with that said, well, you can always, like, once again, just screenshot this and then keep this somewhere and always reflect on this anytime you write anything, really. But with that said, this is going to be the end. Just a bit of housekeeping before we close the stream, actually. Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific time, we are starting a new game project series. That'll be, once again, that is Monday. What day would it be? January 15th, I think? Yeah, January 15th. We'll be starting a new game series. On the channel. And that'll be 2 o'clock Pacific time. So I hope you guys will come out for that. And yeah, next week we'll see what else we do. I'm also working on another thing, but who knows how long before the first episode of that comes out. Honestly, it might not even be till like February. But there's something I'm working on that I want to do. It's been on my mind for a little while. But yeah, we'll do that at some point. But for next week, we got 2 streams coming down the hatch, and that's our new game series. So hope you guys will come out for that. Until then, I hope you guys have a great Friday night, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. And I'll see you guys Monday. God bless you.